It is no secret that central banks around the world have been adding gold to their reserves at a record pace over the last year. And we've also discussed some of the reasons why that is occurring. But what it all boils down to is the ultimate, the real reason why this is occurring. We're going to talk about that in this video as we explore. Over the last 12 to 18 months, we have seen a record amount of gold moving into central bank vaults over that time period. It has been an amazing thing to see. But with all that being said, we know that pales in comparison to the overall amount of gold that has been accumulated by individuals around the world, mostly in the East. But that is something that has been happening for many, many years. In fact, I would say probably the last several hundred years, we've seen that as part of their culture, if not even longer than that. And really, the bottom line is they're doing it for the reasons why most of us hold gold. And we do it to protect ourselves against economic instability, but also other kinds of instability, like geopolitical instability and the like. But something that is happening there is part of the reason why many central banks around the world are adding gold to their coffers. We know back in April of 2019, the Bank of International Settlements, which is known as the Central Bank of Central Bankers, declared gold as a Tier 1 asset, putting it equal to and on par with cash in terms of liquidity and for even transactions between central banks, which they do transact in gold among themselves in many different ways. And I think that is the precipice for some of the reasons why central banks are adding gold to their coffers. But what is the other reason why people add gold to their coffers personally, but also what central banks do? And you've also heard me say that we should be our own central banks. Well, the move to dollars to gold holdings implies a weakening U.S. dollar and a stronger gold price. And that weakening of the U.S. dollar is not just in terms of, the inflation that we're seeing with the dollar, but we're also seeing the de-dollarization trend, which is afoot, and that's the buzzword of the past year or so. More and more of the nations that are not necessarily friendly, but although they have done business with and have plenty of them in their reserves around the world, many of these nations have really started to embrace each other more, especially in terms of the partnership known as BRICS, which is an acronym for the top nations that are involved in this organization that want to form trade alliances and partnerships and relationships with each other upon multiple ties to compete with the relationships from the G8 countries and the G7 countries and the like. There is a deepening divide between East and West geopolitically, although in reality, there's a lot of those nations are sprinkled around the whole world, especially those Latin American countries that want to be a part of or are a part of the BRICS nations, the BRICS plus nations now as they're being defined. Very, very soon, you're going to see them come together at their conference in South Africa, Johannesburg, and announce that they will likely be forming a new trade currency between these nations that very well could be backed by gold someday in order to provide the extra, reliance and validity to what they are doing, the confidence that these nations will have, because each of these nations have their own agendas, and the relationships between these nations may be dicey at best for some of them. And so they want to be able to have a commonality, and that commonality very well could be gold. So I think that's one reason why many of these nations are holding on to gold and increasing their coffers of gold. But the thing is, as much as that is the reason why people are central banks, as well as people are adding gold, central banks, by and large, are adding gold for a much more valid reason. than anything that's really being talked about today. And that is they're losing faith in their own currencies. That's right. Their own currencies are essentially dying in many of these nations. That's why the dollar strength is nearing almost record levels for a record amount of time, in spite of 40-year high inflation of the US dollar. As much as they want to get rid of the dollar, more so than ever, they need to protect themselves against their own currencies. That's exactly right. And so that is a precipice, I think, why many of these nations are starting to accumulate more gold for themselves to have the ultimate insurance policy against their own fiat currencies. And many of these nations have gotten in trouble in the past, especially Turkey, where they have a currency crisis. It seems like every couple of years there's a currency crisis there, which is why people literally in Turkey are putting gold coins in their mattresses. Yeah, I covered that in a video as well too. It's a part of the Turkish culture to have gold coins. In fact, their mint produces more coins, faster pace than the United States does gold eagles. And people love those things because it is a way. Gold is the ultimate arbiter. It's the ultimate form of money. And this is why people carry it. Central banks around the world, they hold gold bars, which is you see represented here. Although I don't have one of the contract size gold bars. Those are 400 ounces. I just can't quite afford to get one of those. But boy, it'd be nice to have one of those. They also stack kilo bars. The closest thing I can get to it is a 100-gram bar, which is a tenth of the size. It's kind of cool to think about, the idea of a kilo bar being stored. But sometimes these central banks as well hold coins, Krugerrands, Eagles, Britannias, and the like, where they have in their coffers. And that's something that you and I can hold on to and buy as our reserves, our personal reserves. Be your own central bank. Be your own central bank, because you cannot have, you can only have so much trust in the currencies that are being printed by governments to try to essentially digitize and print themselves out of trouble. And, they create more debt for themselves when you have central banks around the world that are trying their best, at least to some measure, to stave off inflation by quantitative tightening. But on the other hand, they have legislatures and politicians that want more government spending. They want to abandon free market principles in order to preserve the free market. That's a famous saying by a Republican president here in the United States, George W. Bush. But in many cases, that's exactly what's happening, where two branches of government, if you want to call central banks around the world, owned by governments. Of course, here in the United States, it's a quasi-private institution. It kind of skirts the line between both. And it's more to it. They use advantages of both being a government and a private institution for the benefits of both. But in reality, who benefits from it? Certainly not us, the American taxpayer. And none in these other countries around the world benefit either from some of the policies of some of these central bankers. But one thing is for sure, what we can do is we can protect ourselves, and we can benefit like they do by having gold as part of our portfolio. And when you hold gold, you are essentially doing exactly for the same reason these central banks will not talk about for the most part, to protect themselves against their own currencies. And that's the bottom line, because gold is the ultimate form of money. It has been money for thousands of years. And certainly, as a Bank of International Settlements has regarded gold up from a tier 3 asset to a tier 1 asset, we've known that for thousands of years, that it's a tier 1 asset, and it is something that will protect yourself as well. And this is one reason why, by the way, since about 2017, I made a decisive move to invest more and to hedge more, I guess, with gold in my personal portfolio. Now, I'm not anti-silver by any stretch. In fact, there's probably more potential in silver to some regards right now, but there comes a point in time in your life, and that is different for every person, when you must try to look at the safest option out there. And I see gold as the safest option in terms of its wealth preservation attributes, as well as being the ultimate hedge, and the stable store of value. Stable store of value is a very attractive measure, I think, for many of us out there. But nonetheless, to buy gold means you have to have a level of patience and fiscal discipline that is not needed quite as much with silver, although there is certainly a level of that with silver as well too. It also, I think, inspires hard work to a degree. And again, I'm not saying that silver doesn't, but it takes a lot more to save up for an ounce of gold, I think, in many aspects than it does for 15 or 20 ounces of silver. I actually put out a challenge to each individual and each silver stacker, especially if you don't have a 1 ounce gold coin in your collection or in your stack, to save up and as an experiment to get 1 full ounce, to feel it in your hand for that full ounce. Even if it's just one, the exercise in doing so, I think you'll have an appreciation for what it takes to do it, because many of us are not rich, and gold and silver are not there to make you rich. They're there to protect you. They're there to essentially freeze frame your wealth. We heard the term wealth preservation, and it is. But think about freezing the value of your assets. It's really what it is. It's not an enrichment device. It is a protection. And that's what gold is. And these central banks around the world know it, which is why they are protecting themselves. They're freeze framing their value because they don't have faith in their own currencies. That's the bottom line. And it's not just because Sal said so. It's because history and economics says so. So let me know what your thoughts are about this video. I'd like to extend a multitude of gratitude to each and every one of you for taking the time to watch, and to encourage you to please rate, share, comment, and subscribe.